Hey guys, Jerry from Double Diamond Fab. Got a quick video on how to get the cheapest possible steel and also some negotiation tips. But before we get into it, if you would like and subscribe to the channel, we got a ton of welding content and are going to be putting out more in the future. So like and subscribe and then we'll get into this. So generally the steel sales levels of how this works from once they mine it out of the ground to get to the final consumer, there's generally 4 levels. Sometimes the processor and wholesaler are combined, but it usually goes, they mine it out of the ground in slabs. It goes to the mill. The mill produces it in large pieces, which then goes to the processor. They chop it up into usable lengths, so like 20-foot sticks of steel, 4x8 sheets of plate, that sort of thing, and then they sell it to a wholesaler who generally sells it to a retailer. So the objective here is to jump up as many levels as you can. You ideally want to get to the processor level because you are skipping levels of markup and making the steel cheaper. So we'll start with the retailer, which is going to be the most expensive level and the one you want to avoid. So how do you tell if an establishment is a retailer? Well, number one, usually retailers, a lot of them are welding shops. So like a welding shop that's doing projects, in their local area and selling steel on the side just because they have it in stock. Usually a retailer. You generally want to avoid just general welding shops because they are usually buying it from a wholesaler and then charging you absolute retail price. So you want to go up to at least the wholesaler. So a tip, if you're at the welding shop, if you currently buy steel there, if you see like a delivery truck delivering steel, you want to take note of where it's from and try to get a hold of them because that's probably going to be the wholesaler where they're buying it from, and you want to try and buy it from the wholesaler to save some cash. So once you get to the wholesaler level, you find a wholesaler, and generally you have to go to a mid to large metro area to find a wholesaler. If you're in a small town, you're probably only going to have retailers who are trucking it in from a wholesaler that's probably in a 50,000 plus metro area. So if you're in a small town, you want to go to your biggest close metro area and look for steel wholesalers. A couple telltale ways to show if they're a wholesaler or not. Generally, wholesalers, the main thing they do is sell steel. They usually aren't doing consumer welding. They aren't selling other stuff out of their shop. They are solely selling steel. They usually have big warehouses, 50,000 square feet plus, because they house a ton of steel. Another way you can tell, they usually have a large selection. Retailers often won't have everything in stock that you need. A wholesaler is going to have pretty much everything that you want in stock. So that's another good way to tell. So this is going to be a little bit cheaper, and then if you really want to get the cheapest steel possible, you want to try and get to the processor level, which is going to be the cheapest because, like I said, they buy it straight from the mill. There's only one level of markup here. The dilemma with processors is usually you're going to have to buy full sticks of steel and full sheets of plate. So they're not going to cut anything up for you like sometimes wholesalers will. So this is where you want to go if you're buying a lot of something. If you're buying, tons of plate, tons of tube, that sort of thing, usually like 2+ of whatever per week, you want to go all the way up to the processor because they're going to be the cheapest. So a couple good ways to tell and find out who the processors are is oftentimes on steel sticks or plates, the processors will stamp their name on it. So our processor that we get steel from is called American Steel. They're out of Portland. They stamp all of their plate that they sell to wholesalers. So if you're at a wholesaler getting steel, you want to, just like here, you want to look for delivery trucks, number one, and the stamps that's on the steels, and you want to try and get a hold of the processor. Sometimes it's the mill that stamps it, but usually it's the processor. So that's another good way to tell. You're going to have to go to usually a large metro area to find a processor, but if you're getting enough steel, it's generally worth it. So once you find a couple of processors and wholesalers, and I will say it's good to have both because the processor, you want to get all of your large steel that you don't need cut up from them. If you're getting a lot of something, buy it from the processor. The wholesaler, it's nice to have a relationship as well because a lot of times if you need a small amount of an expensive stick of steel or a small amount of whatever, they can usually cut it for you and sell you a partial stick. So it's good to have both in your pocket. So once you have multiple processors and multiple wholesalers located, this is what you're going to do in terms of negotiation. So you want to start by getting a quote from several processors or wholesalers for a type of steel you use a lot of. For example, we use a ton of 4x8 sheets of 3/16 P&O plate. So that's what we would get a quote for. So we would go to processor 1 and say, what is your quote for 3/16 plate? And they give me a quote of 180. Processor 2 gives me a quote of 165, and processor 3 gives me a quote of 170. So I want to take this lowest price and go to this processor and this processor with that price and ask them if they will match it. And if you can also mention that you're looking for a processor to start a relationship with, you're not going to price shop once you start a relationship, but you are at the moment, so you're looking for somebody who's going to give you the best price. Generally, they will at least match it, and if they don't match it, they will oftentimes at least come down a little bit. So let's say processor C matches the price and processor A comes a little bit above that. So you want to take this price, go back to processor B, and see if they can beat this price. And sometimes they will. That's another thing that you have to do. You have to ask for a lower price. Most people just take whatever price that the processor or wholesaler or whatever gives them and just goes with it. They don't ask for a lower price. And sometimes they won't, but oftentimes they will. So you have to ask. So you go back to them with this price that they matched, and then they might come down even more to say $160 a sheet. Then what you do is you negotiate it down even further by making it more favorable for them. And the way you make it favorable for especially processors is by a lot of volume. So you say, and what you do is I generally start with 10% below what they quote me after I tie volume to it. So I say I want 10 sheets, but I want them at $150 each. And they might not come down that low, but they often will counter somewhere in between. They might meet you at $155. So that's how you get cheap steel. You go up the chain at least one level, hopefully 2 levels, get several of them, get a price for a common piece of steel, bid them against each other, and then negotiate volume because they love volume. And that is how you get cheap steel. Comment below any other questions you might have, any other videos that you'd like to see, and thanks for subscribing, guys.